Hey guys, what's going on? So before we jump into the 9.1 Warrior Guide, I wanted to give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video, Squad OV. Squad OV is some really interesting software you can use to improve your WoW gameplay. Essentially, you install the app, you'll see a link to it in the comments, and you can record all of the games that you've played and then pretty much watch them back at any point in time. There's no button you have to press to start a game, and it segments them by arena game too. So as you can see, we can click this arena here and we can see exactly what happened. We can watch the whole game back. We can listen to the audio of it as well. It records everything. So if you feel like you are looking to improve some of your arena gameplay, break down some of your games as well, I highly recommend it. All right, guys, now we're going to jump into the 9.1 guide. Hope you enjoy. Hey guys, what is going on? Welcome to the 9.1 Warrior Guide. Looking at arms today. We did the Fury Guide previously. So there's been a number of changes that have happened. I'd say Warrior hasn't had too many drastic changes to the gameplay. However, it's almost like understanding the other specs and classes and then, how your abilities sort of change relative to that. Apologies for the delay on this. We originally actually scheduled this guide like a week ago, but the microphone quality was really, really bad. So I had to buy a new microphone. Hopefully it's a bit more clear. Let me know if it is. And I'd also preface this guide with saying it's still super early days in the season. Like the season hasn't started yet. It's starting in 4 days. So a lot of things are subject to change, and my opinions on things are going to be super subjective just from my experience. So I'm going to link a couple other Warrior YouTubers as well in the comments below. Magnus usually has some of the best guides and, I guess tips. He's the best warrior, so he's going to have the best guides and understanding as well. So definitely check out what he's putting out. I know Revo's got a YouTube channel as well, so I'll link that below too. Should be some interesting gameplay there. And then anyone else I've forgotten, I've got some, I know Bajiro publishes a lot of stuff too. So use all this information from a lot of different people to put together your own opinion on things. I think that's generally the best way to go forward. Okay, so in terms of changes, Warrior really, in like the base kit, hasn't had too many changes. Overpower has been buffed by 10%, kind of negated by the increase in armor that people are getting anyway. And Execute, if you're not Venthyr, not Condemn essentially, Execute has been buffed by 10% as well. Similar just to match armor. Let's go through what we normally do, where we quickly go through talents. We talk about, talents are pretty basic usually. I'm just going to shrink my little chat blocker. And like, I would say largely you can kind of follow these talents every game. Sudden Death, obviously, I would highly recommend making a weak aura for Sudden Death. If you join the Discord in the link below, you'll also see the weak aura in the weak aura section. And essentially, this will just flag when you have a Sudden Death proc. Really, really useful because you want to use these off cooldown, right? You don't want to just be holding Sudden Deaths the whole game. And I'll show you it makes a really big difference because essentially you can't stack your sudden deaths then. I'll see if I can get it to proc on something, but I would highly recommend getting that. It's probably just for some reason not going to proc right now, but we'll keep meleeing it and seeing if it procs while we're talking about it. Stormbolt, clearly the best. Stormbolt's really, really useful. You would generally going to be using Stormbolt in most comps on the kill target, largely because it's physical, so it can't be dispelled. A lot of other stuns are magical, if you're playing with a Shadow Priest, stuff like that. You can use it on the healer, but in twos, I generally find it's actually higher value to use your Stormbolt on the kill target. Firstly, because there's no travel time. Or, if there is, it's not a big deal. But when you use it on a healer, there's this travel time that a lot of people can kind of like preempt if they're good. They can Night Elf meld it, all this kind of stuff. But also it's just a bit clunky with a 20-yard range. You have to kind of spend some time getting in range of the healer and then Stormbolting him. A bit awkward. So Stormbolt, really good. Generally use it on the kill target. This line is where you're going to have some interesting plays. If you are Venthyr, I highly recommend using it on Massacre pretty much every single game. Massacre is just so useful with Condemn. it just gives you an extra 15% buffer where you can condemn them. So realistically, the only time you can't condemn is between 35 and 80. So, not too bad. Rend is really useful on a Kyrian on Night Fae, especially with the legendary that resets your overpower. This is an insane ability, largely because you can sweeping strikes and rend 2 targets, which means essentially your sweeping strikes is instantly giving you like 30 rage and free value. And the damage from rend is actually pretty considerable. It looks low, like 3.8k over 15 seconds. Firstly, it's bleed. It makes you do more damage to the target, and it has an instant damage effect when you press it. So pretty decent. And then if any of those crit as well, you get increased more value out of that. So I really, really like rend. I think it's a really fun playstyle. You largely want to get rend up as soon as possible if you're running it and keep it up. It's really, really good on plate targets. The reason why is because bleed damage isn't mitigated by armor, so you're getting the full value out of it. And look, even with just getting the strength proc, it goes to 4.2k. If we avatar and we colossal smash, this thing's going to do heaps of damage. So decent ability to run. D-stance is pretty much the baseline. It's what makes arms really good. You want to run Warbreaker every game. Avatar is still, in my opinion, best just because it's not on the GCD. It removes roots and snares, and that's a really, really important thing for a lot of new warriors where they're using Avatar as only a DPS cooldown. So Avatar is one, yes, it is DPS cooldown, but the fact that it also removes the roots and snares means that you get a lot of value using Avatar to break out of roots or when you're slowed rather than just pressing it. So against mages, against druids, shamans, anything that have a consistent root, you should 99% of the times hold your avatar till they use the root and then break it with the avatar, and then you can blade storm the next one if you need to, etc., etc. It essentially just holds your healer's dispel, and in the current meta with the amount of really powerful dots and magic effects that exist right now, your healer having to dispel every single one of your roots and slows is going to really, really impact the overall ability to stay in the game and have good pressure. Just because your healer's he's probably going to want to hold firstly his dispel for something important like a poly or a mind game, stuff like that. And if you can just do him a favor by removing your own snares, it's going to be really good because you still get the value out of the 20% increased damage. Dreadnought, in my opinion, is still really, really good. Just increases your damage overall. Big thing to try and do with the seismic wave is you can kind of angle it so it hits multiple targets. And that's just something to get used to. If you want to increase the dam to max, I'll just move this down for a sec. Anger management, also something that is interesting right now. Anger management and in for the kill synergize well together because essentially you get faster wall breakers. And largely the anger management typically puts Warbreaker to a 30-second cooldown. So in 2's, anger management is really, really good against other warriors and things that have a disarm on a 45-second cooldown, which most disarms are. The reason for this is that essentially you're throwing them off kilter because they're disarming your first Warbreaker, thinking you're not going to have it up, and then their disarm is always desynced from your Warbreaker unless they're willing to hold it. So they can really only disarm your third Warbreaker. Every third Warbreaker is maybe 135, right? So you always get one Warbreaker that is full value. But in my opinion, for most games, Dreadnought is better unless there's CC that you have to avoid, you don't want to break CC. But honestly, with how you can play Dreadnought, you can kind of just angle it so it's that way. Unless they're really stacked on top of each other, it shouldn't break your CC. So in terms of PvP talents, Sharpen is usually baseline against the majority of comps that have a lot of healing. So you don't necessarily need Sharpen every game, and this is one thing that a lot of warriors get wrong as well. They run Sharpen into everything. A lot of the times you can if you need to peel, warrior has enough base damage that you can kind of just go without it. But it does make a significant difference if you're able to sharpen, because essentially it elongates your CC chain, and that's sort of how you want to use sharpen as well. When you're playing in twos, sharpen is used to just kind of, you should try and use it at least when they have health they need to heal up. Sharpening at the start isn't bad if you're not expecting to like get any pressure for some reason, and you just want to put it on cooldown. But honestly, it's like the fact that it doesn't really do that much for your Mortal Strike. Like 15% increased damage is like 300 damage, or 500 damage or something. So not really a big deal. And the reduced healing at the start of the game just isn't that important, right? Because by the time you've got the sharpen off, like they'll just wait to heal until the sharpen falls off. However, if you sharpen a 50%, they have to heal into it or the guy's going to die, right? So really, really important to use your sharpens when the target is low in twos, and not just throw them out randomly. Also, very, very strong into comps that can self-heal, right? Like self-heals generally, unless it's like, pretty much all self-heals do have some form of limit, right? So like you can't just spam self-heals the entire game. You can to an extent, but usually there is a drop-off point where like you either run out of mana, you run out of your personal resource. However, when you use sharpen on that, right, they have to try and heal through it because it's double DPS, and if they don't, they're going to fall really far behind. So sharpening there can be good. I would generally not run sharpen into double DPS unless you're versing like a hybrid, like a feral. If you're versing something like warrior unholy DK, I like wouldn't run sharpen. Death Sentence, still very, very good if you need uptime. You don't necessarily need this talent, honestly. Like if you play Kyrian as well, like you'll notice Death Sentence becomes a bit of a crutch. So it's not super important, but really, really good to maintain uptime. And one of the big things that makes Venthir so good, because you essentially get this mini charge into a lot of highly mobile comps. Looking at the other ones, Banner, War Banner, in my opinion, really, really powerful ability. However, it does require some understanding of the game pace, right? And what's happening. So if you're a new player, running Banner might feel really, really hard because you're like, when do things happen? Whereas as you get more and more experience, you'll be like, okay, so whenever the hunter stuns my healer, 2 seconds later, he throws a trap. So if I use my War Banner, 2 seconds in, he either has to hold the trap and my healer can get away because the stun's over, or he has to, because he's waiting and killing the banner, or he throws the trap and his trap is now 4 seconds. So not as good value. It's also really good in melee cleaves, like against melee cleaves, in my opinion, when there's a lot of frantic things happening, like against TSG, a lot of the times, like the warrior and the DK will be so like tunneling something so hard that they'll just start just forget that there's a war banner down and they'll use their whole go into it. But in my opinion, you generally want to use this where there's some predictable CC or where you can get a lot of value whether you get a banner. For instance, Frost DK's last season, I ran banner a lot because if I bannered their go, that pretty much means that we don't have to use any cooldowns. However, it's something that takes a bit of skill and getting used to, and there's way more reliable options out there in terms of peeling a lot of the times. Master and Commander is one of those reliable options. So Master and Commander just kind of puts the rally to 2 minutes and makes it do 15% additional health, which works really, really well with this conduit here that increases the duration and health granted. Essentially, this means that while you have rally up, not many things can die. So every 2 minutes, and you kind of want to sync this up to when your team is kind of low. Like pre-rallying is not that bad. If you're rallying someone at 35%, that's actually okay. Because sometimes rallies on the GCD and you just don't get it off in time. However, rallying at 80% doesn't really do anything because the health just drops. So you really big thing with rally is you want to be calling out when you're using your rally. And then as it goes to 5 seconds, 10 seconds, you want to say my rally ends in 10 seconds because it's going to chunk a lot of health. For instance, let's turn war mode on so the rally works. I'm at 57k now, right? And then I'd probably be calling when rally ends soon. But, I just take this amount of damage. And then when rally ends, boom, lose 15k health there. So really, really important to take note because a lot of people have died just thinking they're a lot safer than they are because they've been rallied. If you aren't a warrior main, it's really, really understandable that would happen. Storm of Destruction, I think this is still really good on Kyrian or against, melee cleave, because essentially your Blade Storm, like, especially if you're running Unhinged, your Blade Storm just gets more value, you do more damage with it. It's a good talent if you don't have too much to run. Duel is an interesting one. I would recommend Duel where you don't really know what your third talent is. I think with the removal of Overwatch, which was the Intervene Reflect, Duel's actually improved in value overall, because Intervene Reflect was kind of a safe choice against a lot of things like Rogue Mage, against a lot of caster teams that would have high burst. Often Duel's really, really strong when you are not the target, because it means that the damage that you're dueling is just nerfed. So if you duel a Combust, you duel a Dark Soul, you duel a Stormkeeper, stuff like that, you will stop a huge amount of damage from that go, especially if it's not on you. And a lot of people aren't used to playing around duel, so they'll still use those cooldowns, not into you, but into the target that is being, like, they're focusing. So if you're playing like Warrior DK and they're always killing your DK, pressing Duel on the mage means that, look, you could live way, way longer, because like your DK could probably hold AMZ into Combust if you've got a Duel up. It's got a pretty short cooldown when you consider the effect, and it would line up with stuff like, it lines up if you hold it with Combust, Dark Souls, a whole bunch of different things. But you really want to make sure you're getting full value out of this. Don't use it randomly. Use it when they're using cooldowns and they're actually getting that damage off. So a big thing I made a mistake on is I would duel instantly when they Dark Souled, and Dark Soul's 20 seconds, right? So, they're still having to cast the Chaos Bolts. It's better to actually to use your stops on the Chaos Bolts and then use the duel. Don't just duel at the start and then kick a Chaos Bolt, because what's the point? You could have stopped it anyway. Useful, but situational. Disarm, generally good against melees overall. Some interesting interactions are it's good against hunters as well. Like, you can disarm aim shot. You can also disarm things like rogues on Shadow Dance, rogues on Vendetta. You want to use disarm similar to how you use duel, right? You want to use it to stop cooldowns, and you don't want to use it too randomly. One big thing to try and use it on is use it on things like Warbreaker. Warbreaker lines up exactly with disarm's cooldown, 45 seconds. So disarming every Warbreaker is a really good way that you can just stop a lot of damage. Generally straightforward talent, run it when there's melee out. Demolition is weirdly like sleeper good, especially against Necrolords and Mistweavers. So Shattering Throw works on shields, right? And essentially with Demolition, you have your Shatter Throw every minute. So a lot of the times, like, you'll be facing like a Feral or something, and he'll clone you and then do a full Fleshcraft, which is about 30k sometimes, or 25k, depending on whether he did it in Bear. You can shatter this entire thing every time consistently. If there's multiple Necrolords on the team, you can shatter multiple shields. And if you think about it, right, that means every minute you're getting an ability that does like 30k damage onto a shield. And similar to Monk Cocoons, this will actually just one-shot Monk Cocoons. 500% means that essentially your Shattering Throw is doing 1,000% more damage. So you can kind of think how much damage that is. Absolutely bonkers, right? It's going to just crack through anything. Largely something you want to consider in those comps where you don't have a good third option. It's a bit awkward. Maybe more of a twos talent. Warbringer, this root, I've seen a couple people play with this. I don't think this is that good. Like, you do a bit of AoE, and you like root the targets behind you. I don't know. It feels useless. Maybe in like RBGs or something, it could be good just to slow teams and stuff and have another root, but overall, something I'm not too interested in. Largely, my go-tos are going to be something like Sharpen, Warbanner, Master and Commander, and then I like, depending situationally, I might switch this out to Disarm. I might switch this out to Death Sentence. I might switch Warbanner out to Master and Commander. Use the information I told you to kind of build a good idea on what you should be running, and then, work around that. So, in terms of Legendaries. So, Legendaries are one thing that a lot of people get confused by, they're difficult to necessarily know which ones to run all the time. In my opinion, to make it really simple for you guys, if you are Kyrian, I would run Battle Lord, right? Like Battle Lord, Kyrian, Night Fae, Necro Lord. I would say the legendaries that you like really want to have are Battle Lord, Misshape and Mirror. Misshape and Mirror for all warrior specs. I would try and get this as your second legendary always. But the first one for anything that isn't Venthyr should be Battle Lord. And then you could be looking at getting Elysian Might if you're Kyrian as soon as possible. And I would avoid the other two ones. Elysian Might will be really, really good, but you might not run it every game, especially in twos. I think Battle Lord might be better. In terms of the other things, as a Venthyr, as an Orc, I would actually think Seifus is one of the best things you can run as an Orc. Just consistent value against anything that can CC you. And something that's just baseline going to give you some extra stats. Nothing too amazing. The other one that's good for Venthyr is also Exploiter. Exploiter is quite strong. It makes your Mortal Strike do about 50% more damage when you stack it up twice, and it's pretty easy to get. It's some big damage there. Synergizes really well with stacking crit. And largely, I would say Sinful Surge isn't too interesting, in my opinion. I would probably just go with Exploiter or Seifus, and then go for Misshape and Mirror. So Misshape and Mirror you should run pretty much wherever there's value out of reflecting on your target. Because Overwatch is removed from the game, in my opinion, Misshape and Mirror's value goes up considerably higher. That is because there's only one way now you can put Spell Reflection on other targets. However, it applies to your nearest ally, so you got to be kind of smart with how you use it. You almost have to do something similar to the Intervene Reflect if you're playing like Warrior Shadow Priest HPAL. Or like a cleave, a lot of comps actually, because usually your healer is going to be at the back. So you do have to make sure that you play around it, but the range of it's really big. The targets do have to be line of sight though. So that's legendaries. Legendaries are a lot easier to get now in the new system, so pretty easy to farm those up considerably. Okay, so in terms of let's talk about gearing real quick. In my opinion, I really prefer just haste first. I feel like it's really, really comfortable for me. I run like 17% haste, 32% verse at the moment almost. And I put haste gems in just because it feels smoother, it feels more fun. As you get higher and higher, I would say crit and mastery are pretty equal. For Venthyr, critical strike's pretty good too. It's kind of up to you preference, whether you prefer crit or haste. Haste just makes your globals faster. As you can see, my GCD is 1.28 seconds. If I take a whole bunch of my haste gear off, it goes up 1.32. Let's take that off. Let's take that off. And yeah, like as you can see, that's why the game feels more fluid as you get more and more haste. However, running the full crit gives you some really nice synergy. Like I said, with Exploiter, you do huge amounts of damage on your Mortal Strike, especially if you stack it up with Overpower. So, overall, like really, really useful to do, and you know, good habit to get into. So, I would say haste verse for everything else though, and mastery and crit are pretty useful as well. With the new Kyrian legendary and rend stacking, I actually think crit is probably better than mastery for Kyrian, and I'd probably focus that as my second stat. In terms of which Covenant to play, Venthyr is largely better than Kyrian for twos, just because of how Condemn works. In threes, it's kind of up to preference. In my opinion, I like the versatility. Like with Kyrian, like in my opinion, I think it's really, really powerful. It works in a lot more comps. However, Venthyr does slap. It does a lot of damage. And really, really good in like caster melee comps where you're doing a lot more single target focused damage because you don't want to break CCs and stuff like that, like warrior mage, etc., etc. So that's up to preference. I would say Night Fae is not really the best. It's not like it's unviable, but it's just not that strong. And Necro Lord is good. It's good where you can get a high amount of value from using your banner on a class that benefits from mastery. So you want to be playing that with comps like DKs. Unholy DK, I think gets a lot of value out of mastery with its pets, rep pallies, stuff like that. And the fact you can't be slowed actually makes a pretty considerable difference too. In terms of conduits are pretty straightforward. Largely, the conduits I like to run is I like Disturb the Peace on the Finesse conduit. The other one you can run is also Safeguard. Just depends on what you're versing. Largely, in my opinion, Safeguard is really, really good too. Just prevents some damage. But a lot of the times, like if you think about when you're using Intervene, without the Intervene Reflect, a lot of the times you're intervening is to absorb melee physical damage. So the fact that the target doesn't take the damage, like, I don't know, it's a weird interaction. I'm not actually 100% sure how that works. But having 7 seconds off Piercing Howl makes a huge difference. 23-second Piercing Howl means that essentially, you can keep Piercing Howl up a lot of the game, and that makes a really big difference against melee just because it's a much better slow. The other one is Inspiring Peace. I think that's good finesse conduit too. Very, very reliable. I would always get Stalwart Guardian. Take self 32 seconds or 30 seconds off your Die by the Sword. Super, super valuable. Outside of that, in my opinion, the two baseline potencies that you should always have are I've swapped all my stuff swapped a lot of stuff on this one to Fury because I was playing around with it, but Mortal Combo. This is just an insane conduit. Means you can get some random burst spikes and crash the ramparts. In my third potency, I'm experimenting with a couple things. Ashen Juggernaut kind of feels a bit underwhelming. I'm also looking into Adaptive Armor Fragment because 3% strength, right? If I have 1310 strength right now, it does make a pretty considerable difference. Like it's about 40, 50 strength. It's like a nice, similar, like a third of my trinket. It's not bad, not great. But we'll look into that further, especially if it synergizes with proc trinkets and stuff like that. And it's just pretty consistent increase in damage. Harrowing Judge Punishment is really average. I would say the Kyrian potency and the Necrolord potencies are very, very good. Actually, all the potency, like Covenant specific ones, except for Venthyr, are all really good third options. I'd almost always pick them as my third option, especially Kyrian. Piercing Verdict is a sick ability and just makes your spear slap harder. Crash the Ramparts is just baseline considerable increase in damage, especially if you're playing Dreadnought. I really wouldn't see you not playing Crash the Ramparts unless you weren't playing Dreadnought. And yeah, that's all the conduits. Pretty straightforward. Endurance is very lackluster. There's really only one endurance you can play. Stalwart Guardian and Brutal Vitality is very average. So let's talk a little bit about gameplay, rotations, comps, all this kind of stuff. And this is where it gets a lot more subjective. I think the majority of the information I said before is pretty easy to follow. For this season, in my opinion, the best comps that are going to be really, really powerful are things that were good last season. Those things like Warrior Shadow Priest, I think will be really, really good, especially with like a Druid. Really, really strong, high amount of pressure, and you can essentially just swap around really hard. Shadow Priests are looking very strong with their instant master spell as well, so you just have a lot of continuity there. And your Intervene just synergizes really well with Shadow Priests because a lot of the times, they need to extend some time for their cooldowns, and your Intervene can give them that flexibility. Outside of that, I also think TSG with an Unholy DK will be extremely strong, and you can play this one as Kyrian or Venthyr. I think the 8-second Kyrian Spear will be stronger, in my opinion, than the Condemn in there, but honestly, because Unholy DK doesn't necessarily do the same types of goes, you kind of just go off stun and strangulates. Condemn's going to be really strong too, just because you're going to have so much single target damage and the ability to swap a lot easier than Kyrian does. I think Kitty Cleave with a Kyrian Warrior will be really, really good. I don't think Turbo will be too good with the enhancement nerfs because enhancement did a lot of healing there, but I think it will still be viable. It's not going to be tier 0. In terms of comps that we haven't really seen yet that might be good, I actually think WLD, WLS could be good again. It really just depends on the survivability of locks. And some things that I think are kind of sleeper OP that I'd be really interested in playing next season will be Thunder. Ellie Shamans are looking really, really powerful, and their build is a lot less setup and more like just dot. Really, really high pressure flame shocks and just getting your like fire elementals out every 2 seconds. So that consistent pressure works really well with Warrior, like things just like sharpening that damage. You don't even have to get CC, and just killing stuff in like, a single Stormkeeper Warbreaker go on a target. And they have really good utility and survivability as well. So all these comps, in my opinion, are really good. In terms of the best healer and twos for a warrior, I would probably put Resto Druid number 1, Resto Chamois number 2, pretty close as well. I'd put Holy Pally number 3. I might actually put Holy Priest number 3, Holy Pally number 4, and then Disc Priest number 5. So the reason why for these rankings, I think Resto Druid heals are looking intense. They're really, really strong. The synergy between Resto Druid and Warrior is timeless, right? It's been around for ages. And you have a lot of ability to swap, peel for each other, and essentially just drag out a game until they can't really live anymore. They just Resto Chamois has a lot of new utility. They've got a huge amount of, utility with their new Unleashed Shield on Water Shield, which puts a 50% sharpen on a healer if they're standing in the pool. This works really, really well with a Kyrian Spear, and then you can stun off that and then do your own sharpen. So essentially it's like 12 seconds of sharpen. Nuts. In my opinion, Holy Priest just does a lot of damage, and it does have a lot of utility. You do have a lot more pump there too with power infusion. And Holy Paladin, I think, has lost a lot of its healing and mana potential. While it still has decent setup and it's still useful, I don't think it really has the output to heal a warrior, like who's taking a lot of damage from something like a caster. Whereas similar thing with Disc Priest. I just think Disc Priest kind of lost a lot of healing output. They need a class that can kite really well and just prevent damage on themselves. And that's not necessarily an arms warrior who just takes damage. So those are my recommendations for 2s and 3s. As in my opinion, the strongest comp for warriors next season will be TSG with either an Arsham or a Resto Druid. I think TSG with an Arsham is a lot more offensive, whereas Resto Druid will just be looking to drag out the game as long as possible. I think things like Fire Mage, obviously, Warrior will always be good. It just probably would be a little bit harder than it was last season. And, things like Ret Warrior will still be good too. I'm not 100% sure exactly on if there's been really any changes, but I would probably say Ret Warrior with something like a Resto Druid or a Resto Chamois will be a lot stronger than the Priest variant was. So those are everything on 9.1 Warriors. I think in terms of gameplay, we've discussed this a whole bunch of times, but largely your gameplay is you want to intervene at the right time, do as much damage as possible, and pretty much use your offensive cooldowns on cooldown. A lot of the skill cap from Warrior is using things like Avatar, Bladestorm, Reflect, Banner to just peel yourself and be almost unstoppable. You're always doing damage to the target. So really, really work on those, and we have so many vids on that you can work with. So hope you really enjoyed the guide here. It's almost just a refresher for a lot of you guys who might have quit between 9.0 and 9.1. I think it's going to be an excellent season. While Warriors probably aren't the strongest melee, in my opinion, Ferals or DKs might be, they are still a very, very versatile and strong melee DPS that hasn't really received a nerf ever. So, do I think Arms is stronger than Fury? After the Slaughterhouse nerfs, I actually do think Arms is probably stronger. Pre-Slaughterhouse, I actually was a bit more on the edge. But Slaughterhouse nerfs really just kind of, if it was 7 seconds, it'd be fine, but it does feel like Slaughterhouse drops off a lot now on Fury. So I do think Arms is just better. All right, guys. Hope this was useful to you guys. Take it easy. Peace out.